At 50 yards, Saburo Sakai emptied his machine guns into a Grumman Wildcat and watched it keep flying. 200 rounds, point blank, into an American fighter that should have been coming apart, and it held straight and level as if he had flung a handful of pebbles at it. This was August 1942, over Guadalcanal. Sakai did not miss, and the Wildcat did not fall, and the reason it would not fall is the whole subject of what follows. The guns he had just emptied fired a 7.7mm round, the same bore as an infantry rifle. For years over China, those two cowling guns had been enough, because the planes they met had thin skins and nothing underneath. The Grumman was a different animal. It carried a slab of armor behind the pilot, a windscreen of laminated glass that turned bullets, and fuel tanks wrapped in rubber that swelled shut the moment a round punched through. The Zero had not one of those things. Barrett Tillman, who wrote much of the standard history of these aircraft, called the Wildcat a broadsword and the Zero a rapier. That contrast was a decision made years earlier on a drawing board. Jiro Horikoshi and his team at Mitsubishi had been told to build a fighter that could turn tighter than anything alive and fly farther than anyone believed possible, and the only way to reach both was to throw weight overboard. The armor went. The protected tanks went. The wing itself was turned into the fuel cell, a thin metal skin holding gasoline. What came off the line could outfly the world in 1941, and it carried its pilot inside a structure that would light like a match. For the opening months of the war, the bargain paid in full. The Zero outclimbed, outturned, and outranged everything sent against it. Flying from Formosa, its pilots reached the American fields on Luzon, 500 miles of open water away, and got home again, a range no one had believed a single-engine fighter could hold. Men who met the thing came home shaken when they came home at all. The price for all of it sat in the parts that were not there, and the bill stayed unpaid until the enemy began building aircraft designed to bring their own pilots back alive. Sakai did down the Grumman in the end. He had switched his cannon off to finish the job with the machine guns alone, certain they would serve. When they did not, he flipped it back on, walked a few shells into the engine, and the fighter caught fire at last. Its pilot, a lieutenant named James Sutherland, went over the side and lived. The cannon was no clean answer either, and every Zero pilot knew it. The two 20mm guns in the wings hit like sledgehammers and were murder to aim. Each fed from a drum of 60 rounds, enough for 7 or 8 seconds of fire before it ran empty. And the shells left the barrel so gently that they began to drop almost at once along a path nothing like the fast rifle bullets up. So a man lined up with one set of guns was aiming wrong for the other. Sakai put it plainly. Trying to hit a moving target with them was like swatting a dragonfly with a rifle. Horikoshi himself, the man who had drawn the airplane, never explained the poor strike rate, and wondered aloud whether his own featherweight frame could not hold steady enough against the recoil. When the carriers sailed for Pearl Harbor, each one carried 2 or 3 spare cannon for the whole Zero force aboard, and not one more. The weapon meant to win the war in the air was the part the Navy could least afford to lose. So picture the thing that happened 10,000 times across the Pacific. A pilot closes, fires, sees his rounds flash against the enemy's wing, watches it stagger and pour smoke and drop away beneath him, and turns to find the next one. Smoke pouring off a hit looked like a death every time. What does he write down that night? He writes that he killed it because he had seen it hit and seen it fall. And a good share of the time, the airplane he had buried in his logbook was leveling out 1,000 feet lower, its tanks resealed, its pilot alive, headed home to a deck. No one kept a fuller record of that war than Tetsuzo Iwamoto. He flew the Zero from the first day of the Pacific fighting to the last, from the deck of the carrier Zuikaku, at the Coral Sea to the home islands at the finish, and most historians rate him the highest scoring fighter pilot the Imperial Navy ever produced. When his unit reached Rabaul late in 1943, it flew into the heaviest combat of his life, a siege of months, in which American formations came over the harbor day after day, and the defenders climbed to meet them again and again. By that winter, the Allies were sending hundreds of aircraft against the base in a single day, and the thinning ranks of defenders went up against them until there was almost nothing left to send. Most of his claims were written in that sky. He was an odd man for the part. The son of a small-town police chief, he had been the most insubordinate student in his school, a trumpet player who raised flowers and talked back to his teachers, and on the morning of Pearl Harbor, He spent the Great Raid flying dull circles above his own carriers rather than over the target. He kept a diary the whole 8 years. He marked his victories down the side of his Zero as cherry blossoms, a single bloom for a fighter and a double for a bomber, and over time the medal filled with flowers. The diary, recovered after he died, claims 202 enemy aircraft shot down, with 26 more shared and a long column of probables besides. The historians Ikuhiko Hara and Yasuho Izawa, who worked through the surviving unit logs and the Allied loss records, put the real figure near 80. That gap is not a rounding error. The diary credits him with 48 Corsairs destroyed, almost all over the Solomons between early 1943 and the spring of 1944. Across that same stretch of that same sky, the Americans lost something like 125 F-4Us to every cause there was. One pilot's logbook had claimed the better part of half of them. Some of the marks were not gun kills at all. 14 of them on the flank of one of his fighters, the diary called cooperated victories, and they were not aircraft Iwamoto had shot. They were dauntless dive bombers his 4-plane section had destroyed by dropping airburst incendiary bombs down into their formation over a Japanese airfield. The guns played no part. The diary counted them because they fell and he was there. 30 more Dauntlesses are listed the same way, killed by the bomb and not the gun. A man can be scrupulous about setting down exactly what he saw and still be keeping the record of a war that did not happen. He put his own account into print while he lived, a memoir whose title comes across in English as Zero Fighter Shoot-Down King. The handwritten list behind it runs down the entire catalog of American types. 7 Wildcats, 48 Corsairs, 29 Hellcats, a lone Thunderbolt, a single Mustang, even a B-29. It ran through Japanese editions for years. It has never been translated in full. This is the kind of story that comes apart the moment you hold it against the records, and there is a new one here every week. Subscribe so you catch the next one. None of this made Iwamoto a liar or even wrong about what passed in front of his eyes. He was a gifted and patient pilot, a man who hunted the edges of a fight, struck at stragglers low on fuel or cut from their formation, and was gone before the odds could turn. The cannon that was so hard to aim was lethal when it struck home. Sutherland's Wildcat fell to it, and so did real machines by the 100. Nor were the Japanese alone in this. American pilots overclaimed in every theater of the war, and Sakai's own famous 64 kills come down to 28 in the official Navy ledger. The difference was built into the system. The Imperial Navy credited victories to whole units rather than to single men, and prized the unit's score above the individuals, a habit with an awkward root, since its most experienced pilots were enlisted men who tended to outshoot their own officers, and crediting the squadron kept that from showing on paper. One tangle in the clouds could be written into several logbooks at once. And out over open water, with the wrecks sliding under the waves, there was no way on Earth to check a word of it. Turn the same physics around, and it was merciless. A Zero had no plate behind its pilot and its fuel rode in the wing, while the fighters coming the other way carried 4 to 6 heavy guns of half-inch bore, a far larger round thrown faster and flatter, with no switch to fumble between. A handful of those rounds in the right place, and the machine that danced so well tore open or went up in one sheet of flame. 2 seconds of fire could do it. The Japanese bombers, their tanks just as naked, caught fire so fast that Allied gunners gave them a name. They called them flying cigars. The Americans had learned the Zero's weak spots from a Zero. In the summer of 1942, one came down almost whole on a bare island in the Aleutians, and crews crated it, shipped it home, and flew it against their own fighters until they knew it cold. It could not roll to the right at speed. It could not chase a heavy plane into a steep dive without its controls going to stone. The word went out to every American squadron in the theater. Never try to turn with a Zero, take the fight straight up and down, dive in, fire, and climb away before it could answer. So when Grumman drew up the airplane to succeed the Wildcat, the engineers did not copy the Zero's lightness. They kept the armor, kept the ceiling tanks, kept a frame that could absorb a beating, and paid back the lost speed with raw engine power. The Hellcat that came of it was the Wildcat's toughness with the Zero's one real edge taken away. Here was the trap the Japanese flew into for 3 years running. Their fighter changed little, while the aircraft filling their gun sights kept getting harder to kill. First the armored Wildcat, then the Corsair and the Hellcat, with thicker plate and far heavier guns. The bursts that had folded Chinese biplanes in 1938 now flashed against American skin and did nothing. The pilot saw the strike all the same, saw the smoke all the same, and wrote the kill in his book. By the end, the claims coming back over the Solomons ran as high as 10 times the losses they were inflicting. Tetsuzo Iwamoto did not prosper in the peace. Like a great many veterans, he fell into something near depression, and for years, he could find no work at all. He was called in for questioning by the Allied administration, cleared of any crime, and then learned that no employer would risk hiring a man the occupation might be watching. Only after it ended did he take a job at a spinning mill in his hometown. In 1953, his stomach began to trouble him. The surgeons named it one thing, cut, found it was another, cut again, and somewhere in that run of operations, an infection took hold that they could not turn back. He died in the spring of 1955, 38 years old. The diary surfaced afterward, 202 victories set down in a careful hand, the cherry blossoms still crowded along the flank of a Zero gone long since to scrap. His wife remembered the last thing he said to her. He told her that when he got well, he wanted to fly again.